Hello, everybody, and good morning. Thank you so much for tuning into the show yet again. I'm here to tell you guys that it is about time that you follow or subscribe to the show wherever you listen. I know y'all are out there listening and you're not subscribing and you're not following the show, and I don't like that kind of behavior. You guys know I'm tired of working these garbage jobs, wasting my time. The links are in the description of the show wherever you listen. All the links, all the social media links, all the different platforms. Wherever you listen, all I ask is to subscribe, to follow. Please, please, I'm begging you, subscribe, follow, and most importantly, enjoy today's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the show today. I hope your Christmas week is winding down. Tomorrow will be Christmas Eve for all our listeners. Yeah, I know. I always say I say the next day, and people, my guests are always like, "What? What are you talking about?"
No. You don't have a stroke. This is actually when you're releasing it. Got it.
Yeah. Today I'm sitting down with Professor Pascal Wallisch from NYU. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. So before we get into everything, I would rather you tell everybody what exactly is your level of expertise. Well, not level of expertise. I should say your area of expertise, as well as what you sort of teach over at NYU.
Okay. So I guess my technical area of expertise, that's what I have my PhD in, is visual neuroscience. Yes. So basically, that is how the visual system creates your visual experience. That's my primary expertise. That's what I have my PhD in. What I teach at NYU is a blend of classes on psychology, neuroscience, and now data science, which is basically, okay, so if you want to understand the brain or the mind, you obviously have to tackle tremendous amounts of data, right? And so I'm actually doing more of that lately.
Sure. So it's interesting because I had told you how I found you and why I thought it would be interesting. And for the guests, something you kind of specialize in is the idea of consciousness. Something you would maybe not specialize in, but something that seems interesting to you.
Well, the thing is, of course, yes, it's very interesting. The reason I was, I'm not sure, did a double take there for a second? Was because, or maybe winced, maybe, I don't know, was because in my discipline or in any science, at least until recently, consciousness was always seen kind of as like a dirty word, if that makes sense. Like philosophers talk about that, but poets talk about that, but you cannot scientifically tackle it. As a matter of fact, you can't even really scientifically define it, right? So that has changed recently. So I wouldn't say it's in my primary area of expertise. Otherwise, people will think I'm just making it up as I go along. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the consciousness field. They're just making stuff up. But yeah, no, I do believe that it is a legitimate area of inquiry, and it can be tackled scientifically, but it is not easy. Is that fair? What do you think?
Well, that's what I was going to get at, because now that you told me that your actual area of expertise is neuroscience, something that's, it's scientific. There's numbers, there's data, there's plenty of stuff to focus on.
It's a biological topic. It's basically, there's like action potentials, it's voltage, you can measure it, it's in the brain, you've got cells, you can see them. Yes, this is not woo, yes.
Yeah, so then it's like, okay, consciousness is exactly what you said. It's very, I guess, gray area, almost in the realm of spirituality, kind of something aside from science.
It does intersect with that. So a lot of people, have metaphysical positions about consciousness, or they have, some people think it's like soul, or it's identity, and all those things are very nebulous concepts. Are very hard to define. Let me ask you, how would you define consciousness? How would you define it? Because to study something scientifically, you first have to define it, one, and two, you then have to find a way to measure it. So let's try that. How do you even define it? Then we'll talk about measuring it. How would you define it?
Well, I mean, I guess the best concrete way to define consciousness is that ability to hear and see things that aren't necessarily there.
Okay.
It also helps you kind of feel, because when you think about sound, it's like you need something to vibrate and bounce off things, but we hear ourselves in our mind all the time.
Right. Well, let's talk about that and the challenge of that. So this goes right straight up to the old question of, there's a tree is in the forest, right? And it falls and nobody else is there to hear it. Does it make a sound? Now, I'm happy to tell you that we can now solve this question, or we can address this question. That's been solved. That's been figured out scientifically. And the answer is exactly what you just said. If a tree falls in a forest, it will, by its energy transmission, mechanical energy transmission, excite molecules in the air. So basically, a tree falling will agitate molecules in the air molecules that will bounce into other air molecules that will transmit as a pressure wave. That is measurable. A robot can measure that. Anybody can measure that. However, the sound it generates depends on the mind, or the brain, frankly. That is the nervous system. Not all animals have a brain. That is present, right? So let's say you are there, an elephant is there, and a bat is there, and a moth, and a spider, right? Does it make a sound? And the answer is, to you, yes. The tree falling. To the elephant, yes. As a matter of fact, the elephant will hear it before you, because the elephant hears the low vibrations which transmit farther, right? If you're farther away. The spider will not hear it because it doesn't have ears, or a sense of sound.
Sure.
The moth will probably not hear it, neither will the bat, because their hearing range is too high up to hear these low frequencies of a tree that fell. So basically, that's how you get a disagreement. So the tree falls. That's objective. That you can measure that with some device that measures energy of impinging air molecules. And all of those animals' nervous system pick up these vibrations, except for the spider, because it doesn't have a sense of hearing, doesn't need that. And then what sound that generates in your mind, that will depend on that nervous system. Again, elephant has a lower hearing range than you, the bat and the moth, the higher one. So you would even disagree with the frequency, like of what the sound was, basically.
Okay, so what you're saying there is kind of what you're hearing and what you're perceiving things to be is almost based on a biological makeup?
As far as we can tell, almost. Yeah, I mean, yes. So as a matter of fact, if you stand there, we just drop the tree, but we lesion your auditory cortex. Lesion means destroying it. Nothing has changed in the world, but you can no longer hear a sound. So you're basically cortically deaf. So you are like no longer able to make a sound in your mind. Sure. But let's come let's get back to that in a moment. But let's talk about the second part, which is the measuring part. Let's say what I told you is like that. It is so, and I think it is, and we have evidence for that. But how would you measure this idea that there's something? I think you said like it's like a perspective. It's like an inside view. Yes. So let me ask you this: to make it scientific, right? We have to measure it. So it means we have to operate. It's called operationalize it. So how would you operationalize that? Can you do one thing that we can have a behavioral measurement that would convince me that you are conscious if I don't already believe you are? Do something.
That's tough. I mean, I guess once you started forming the question, I guess my initial thought would be some kind of a brain activity scan.
So what? I mean, just because how do I say that? Like, yes, you can verify that if people have a conscious experience that corresponds to that brain activity, but you have to believe them that they have this experience. What if they're lying to you? What if they're lying to you? You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like maybe they're delusional, or maybe they just don't know. So, and that's actually a very good point in it right there. Just to be very clear, most brain activity, I would say 90%, maybe more, does not lead to a conscious experience. It's just not perceived, not experienced. Most brain activity is not conscious.
That's Freud, correct? He was the one who said
he popularized the idea. He did not come up with this. The idea came from other people like Weber, Fechner, but he popularized it. His idea was that so everybody agrees there's an unconscious, and that idea way predates him. Like I guess that Fechner, Weber, Wundt, right, in the 1870s. But in the 1900s, Fechner introduced the idea of the subconscious, which means that the unconscious mind is basically working against you. It has its own agenda, and it's kind of working against you. And I don't think most people believe that today. That's how his own mind. It has that the unconscious mind, his own mind, and it's working to sabotage you. I don't think that's true.
Sure. But the subconscious mind does, I mean, it does have an effect, correct? Like if you're feeding it with the wrong stuff, it could work against you, no?
No, not really. I mean, most of this unconscious activity is just not even like registered. It has no effect actually. It's not learned, it's not experienced, it's not affecting you in any way. It's not remembered. So one thing that is a misconception is that, you see and experience everything. I would say the vast majority of things that happen in the outside world, right, you just ignore completely. Like I would say more than 99%. So basically, the chair you're sitting on, the clothes you're wearing, the temperature that's going on, all of that does not rise to your level of awareness unless it's uncomfortable, right? Like,
Sure.
Do you feel your chair or your clothing or the air? Not really, right? It's just there. But there are sensors that are constantly monitoring that. But that brain activity does not rise to your awareness, or how hungry you are, or how thirsty, or how any of that. Unless there's a problem, it's not going to rise to your level of awareness, right? So most of it's just completely forgotten immediately. Sorry, not even registered. And most things that you register are processed but then forgotten quickly. So basically, very few things have actually an effect on you long term.
That's an interesting point, because I had never really thought, like there's a table here, but it's not like I think about it. It's not like, oh, here's a table and let me rest stuff on it.
Correct, but I assure you that your brain, your visual cortex specifically, has not constant, but ongoing activity, quite vigorous actually, to process that the table is in fact still there.
Sure.
And that's always happening. And also all kinds of other things, like I said, somatic sensation, which is touch. Like you're basically, when you're touching yourself, right? Like you're sitting there or something like that. That's mostly, that's actually one of the reasons why you can't tickle yourself. Like there's actually systems that monitor like that, but then your other brain tells that, oh, that's just me, so ignore it. So there's all kinds of censorship going on. And so the cascade is something like this. 99% of the things that happen are not giving rise to an experience. 90% of those things don't lead to memory, and 99% of those things don't lead to an action. So even most things that you experience, you don't act on it, right? So what you act on is what matters from an evolutionary perspective, right? That you have to how you change the world. But that's a tiny fraction of what actually happens.
Which is all very interesting, because you hear all the time, I think Steve Jobs was someone, at least I've heard, who would often daydream. And he'd say, I'm creating my own reality, which is kind of an interesting concept.
He was certainly notorious for that, the reality distortion field, right? He just wouldn't take no for an answer. He was like, and I think the idea there was that if you tell people to do something that cannot be done, right? That's just impossible. Maybe you'll be happy with getting them 90 or 80% there rather than would have never started at all. So that's the trick of that. So basically, if you get people to do things that are literally impossible, they tell you, oh, we failed, we couldn't do it. But that you got 80% there for many things that is a win, right? Other than just say never doing it. Of course, some things, unless you complete them, that doesn't, like let's say when you go to Mars, right? Unless you actually get to Mars, that's not useful. However, maybe the technologies, even if you don't get to Mars, the technology you had to create, maybe 80% of technology to get there, you can still use to do something else, right? So this what's called the reality distortion field can be very useful in practice.
Sure. Like I always think, maybe you feel the same way, but outliers to me are always very interesting. The person that came from kind of a rough background, kind of saw their way through it, kind of visualized the future, and then made it happen. That's always been very interesting to me.
And that's actually one of the reasons why you shouldn't let, some overall determinants, maybe your circumstances dictate what you can do, right? There are tons of examples of someone who had, as you said, a bad upbringing, a bad background, but instead of saying I'm a victim or whatever, they said, I'm resilient, I'll do it anyway. Does that make sense? So basically, and those are usually the people who bring the biggest change, right?
Sure.
You mentioned Freud, right? He could not get a professorship for a long time because of anti-Semitism. Einstein, right? I'm not sure if you realize this or know this, but he could not get a professorship, right? And he applied for the Swiss patent office, right? And worked as a patent clerk, third class. He applied and only because he had connections, right? After a couple of years, he applied to be promoted to a patent clerk second class, but that was denied. There was there's no way, that's never going to happen. you're not good enough to be patent clerk second class. So basically, yes. So you have these outlier individuals who create transformational change, but they had all kinds of troubles or issues, but they are usually ones that make it happen. And yes, lots of people were told that cannot be done, right? But that's a different story. Just to be clear, the opposite is not true. Just because you think some crazy stuff that can't be done doesn't mean you're right, right? So that's not sufficient. It's maybe necessary, maybe not even that, but it's definitely not sufficient.
Sure. So it's almost like a case by case type.
Oh
thing.
yeah, you be careful. But sometimes you get lucky, right? Some notorious explorers have been told what you proposed cannot be done, right? But then they sail off anyway, and then they discovered new things that no one knew they were there, right? They surprised themselves.
Right. So that what we've been talking about, is that still a case of like the reality distortion field that you were speaking of?
Yeah, I would argue that. I mean, you have to be quite confident in yourself. If everybody tells you what you propose cannot be done, and you're probably going to die trying it, and then you try it anyway. Yes.
Sure.
You might have to really believe in yourself that's going to be that you're right, that you're going to be okay.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting. Obviously, this whole topic is incredibly interesting. Is there any recent, I guess, moves or like incremental studies or steps that have been progressed, I guess I should say? Has there been any progression in the, I guess, deducing of where consciousness may come from?
Of course, yes. So that's a great question. So I would like to separate that into two questions. One is the hard question of consciousness, and one is what's called the, well, I guess, easy question. But there's no easy questions in consciousness.
Sure.
I guess people call it the soft question. But the hard question, let's set the hard question aside for a moment. I'll tell you in a moment what that is and what the problem with that is. The soft question is basically when you are conscious of a particular experience, which part of your brain is active at that point? And that question is called the neural correlates of consciousness question. And there's been advances on that all the time, right? So basically, every couple of years, we find out a new brain area that is active when you are thinking of your grandmother or something like that. And that's, by the way, not a joke. That's really true. Like we have now basically identified the places in your brain that do become active and how they get active when you think of different concepts. So that's definitely an advance. Another thing we've been figuring out is we can basically predict whether you're going to do something or not if we monitor your brain activity ahead of time. The reason that's important is because it questions the notion of agency. So a lot of people say that being, having agency, right, having self-control is key to consciousness. You know what I'm saying? Like basically, your decision to either raise this hand or raise this hand or raise it now or not raise it all, right? I mean, you feel like you have that autonomy, right? That you
Sure.
can raise your hand or not. So let's try this. Raise your hand at any point. You decide which one and at which time. Try that. Okay. Did you have a feeling that you wanted to raise it, and then you did?
I was like, I'm going to raise it immediately.
Okay.
Bing.
Could you have not raised it?
Yeah, I probably could have waited a second or waited a little longer or used a different hand.
So you were not compelled. You were not forced to do this. It was not. So the reason I'm clarifying is there's some things that are like a reflex, right? So basically, if I hit your knee, if I hammer, and you're not damaged in certain ways neurologically, your knee will extend, right?
Sure.
So that's another thing. Much of motor behavior is a reflex, right? So walking, for instance, is a reflex. What a reflex is a one synapse connection between a sensory neuron and a motor neuron, and it does not involve the brain at all. It just does its own thing. So basically, if you decapitated somebody and had them walking on a treadmill, elevated maybe with some suspension, they would keep walking. So walking does not require your conscious intervention. It's more like a controlled falling, and that needs to be done so quickly that your brain activity is mostly just messing that up. So many behaviors don't need brain intervention at all, right? So what brain intervention means is that instead of having a reflex arc where you go from sensory neuron to motor neuron, you involve the whole brain, or not the whole brain, but a part of the brain, which, by the way, is modifies this response. So it makes it more flexible, means you could raise the hand or not, but it takes also much longer. So for many things that are really, really time sensitive, like for instance, something flies in your eye or flies towards your eye and you need to close your lid, there's no brain involved. That would take way too long. That makes sense.
Sure.
So there's sensors in your eye that if there's something flying towards them, it just close, or maybe touch the eye, the lid goes down, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And then there's tons of those. But let's clarify. So not everything is a reflex, right? So you had some. This was not a reflex. It was not like you put your hand on a hot stove and you had to retract it. It's not a reflex.
Right.
Right. So the question is then, and this is an important philosophical and scientific point. Could you have? So you said you felt like you could have not raised your hand or raised a different hand or raised it at a different point, but could you? How would we know? Because we only saw you raise the hand when you said you did, but we didn't observe the counterfactual that you didn't when you didn't, if that makes sense. So we can't. Right. So we can't observe that.
It's like observing. It's trying to grasp at something that kind of isn't. It hasn't happened. So how can you get any data on it?
Hasn't happened and can't happen. So you can't get data on that, right? So we're in this weird situation where every time we want to do something, then that happens, right? Which is amazing because that means that you think you did that. But how do you know, that some people have pointed out, that this is not, I think it was Leibniz who started this originally a couple hundred years ago, what's called a pre-stabilized harmony, meaning the idea is you're watching a movie. So you're not actually, you're not causing it, but you're watching something that's been prearranged. How would you know if you caused it or not? Does that make sense? If you're watching a movie of your own life, like if this is like some kind of game, but it's pre-recorded, you wouldn't know if you did it.
Sure. Okay.
Right. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, is that similar to how, I don't know, I guess people say we look a lot different than we think we look?
Probably. I haven't thought about that, but that's probably related. I mean, what this gets to is that your view of reality is not reality. It's a model of reality, and it can differ from reality in many ways. This is one of them. But what I was trying to get at is, if we measure your brain activity, if we had hooked you up to an EEG, I could have predicted before you knew which hand you were going to raise and when, which hand you were going to raise and when. But if I can tell what you're going to do before you know what you're going to do, does it mean you have autonomy? And the answer is probably not, right? If your brain knows before you know. So the reality is, the current model of how we think this works is that your brain makes the decision subconsciously, unconsciously, however you want to call that, for whatever reason that we can't understand. You then do it, but the brain tells you, whoever you are, whatever you are, the talking part of your brain, that it's going to do that, and then to the motor system that it's going to do that, or to do that. And then because that activity raises your awareness a little bit before you actually do it, you think it was you who did it. So it's like a causal misattribution, a fundamental misattribution. And then you make up some story of why you did it. You were itchy, or you're hot, or you want to show me something, or you're following instructions. But this is a carefully constructed narrative. So I'm basically talking right now to the PR department of your brain. That's you. You're making sense of your own actions. Yeah, yes. And by the way, research with split brain patients, there was a patient who had split their brain in the middle through the corpus callosum. So it has two hemispheres that are separated because of epilepsy, not just to some cruel experiment. They had epilepsy, and to cure that or to treat that, they had their corpus callosum cut. The story is, or at least the research suggests, that there's a talking hemisphere and a non-talking hemisphere. And the talking hemisphere is observing your own behavior to make sense of your own actions. So for instance, if you tell with some cue card, because even the non-talking hemisphere can read, laugh, and then you laugh, and then you ask, hey, why do you laugh? Which the talking hemisphere doesn't know. Then the talking hemisphere will make up a story. Oh, you were so funny, or something like that. Or when the instruction is, hit yourself, and you hit yourself, and you ask, hey, why do you do that? And then you obviously see that you did that, and then the talking hemisphere says the instruction was to punch. It was not, it was to hit, but punch. So it makes up a story. So anyway.
So basically, I think I got this from what you said. It's kind of like our consciousness could be the middleman between what we're actually doing and what our brain is kind of telling us to do.
That is
more or less
one way of putting it, yes. And so to put those three thoughts together now is that basically where science is so far is that we are identifying the brain areas and activation patterns that are corresponding to your, when you say I feel this, or I experience this, I experience red, or I experience blue, or I want to do this or that, we're nailing that down. What the research suggests is that most brain activity is not conscious. It raises your awareness relatively late. And basically, your brain is telling you that it's going to do that when it's already made up its mind. Yes, which raise all kinds of issues of autonomy and agency and free will. How about that? Do you have free will if your brain already made up your mind? Are you your brain? Are you living in your brain? Are you a hostage of your brain? Like, is your brain doing all these things? And by the way, some people have made that defense already in like murder trials. They're like, oh, I didn't do that. My brain did that, but I'm sick. My brain is sick. So I have a tumor, or I had this or that accident. So my brain did that, but I can take no responsibility because it wasn't me. So, and of course, in the Western legal tradition, we do believe that people are legally responsible for their actions because, well, they could have done the other thing. But what if you can't? What if your brain is making decisions for you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are stories of people like Sam Kinison or even Roseanne Barr. They got in car accidents and then came out completely different people.
Kinison is a good case for that, right? I mean, he was a wild man. Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right.
And he, if I remember the story, remember this correctly. I'm not a comic, so I don't know for sure, but let me remember this. He basically could not control his own actions. But basically, even if something was in his own self-interest, he couldn't not do the wrong thing, right?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that was his demise.
Right, exactly, right. So some people say that's self-sabotage. I would say no. It's just that a part of your brain went with the immediate reward, which is not in your own self-interest, but that part of the brain doesn't care about that. And then you, whatever you are, then have to deal with the consequences of that. It's kind of unfair if you think about it. And
sure.
Like I said, so Kinison could have made that case. Like my brain is not well; it's making bad decisions, and I have to pay for that, and I should not be held accountable. Of course, you could argue that to the people who are being victimized, right? That doesn't really matter who made the decision. Your brain, you still did it, and you have to be like prevented from doing it again, right? So there's this, and that's, by the way, quite seriously, one of the areas that is called neuro law, where the intersection of neuroscience and society will come probably at the fore first. That some people will claim that they didn't do it, their brain did it, and their brain is not well. So are they responsible? Should they be held accountable?
Right. That's.
What do you think? What do you think?
Well, that's tough to say because there are times where there's people who plead insanity and they're kind of insane.
Well. Let's be clear though. What the insanity plea is that you did not know right from wrong. So, and that's like, for instance, like if you were like, under the influence of serious drugs, right? I don't know, PCP, or psychotic, or under some other schizophrenic spell where you could not tell right from wrong, right? You were not living in reality. You were not in cognitive reality. This is a little bit scarier. So that's John Locke's idea. The idea is if you are from the 1700s, the idea is if you are in touch with reality, you will know right from wrong, and then you will do the right thing if you're properly incentivized, which makes you then responsible, which makes you culpable, but you also get the credit if you do something right. Okay, that's fine. And again, that's been dealt with the insanity defense. If you're literally not in touch with reality, then like, what do you call it? You called it, insane. Yes.
Sure.
So we all agree that then you can, if you do things, if you attack me because you think I'm the devil, and then your brain tells you that, well, we all agree that that's extenuating circumstance, right?
Right.
But what's scary about this is that these people are in touch with reality. So Sam Kinison, for instance, would say, yes, there's a table there. I'm not hallucinating demons. I'm not thinking like I'm God or anything like that. Or maybe he did think that. But the point is that under normal circumstances, he wouldn't think any of those things. And yet he can't do the right thing, if that makes sense. So he's not insane. He's not out of touch with reality. He agrees there's a table there. He agrees there's no demons here. And yet he's doing the wrong thing. That's scary, no?
Oh, very. Yeah. And that was a good, obviously great distinction that you made, because in my mind, as soon as you were talking about kind of it bleeding into law, I'm like, oh yeah, people who plead insanity, it's kind of not their fault. But now there's this middle ground of people who are conscious and they understand, they're in touch with reality, like you said, and they still go ahead and do the wrong thing.
Correct. And they just don't care. Now, I'm not saying that Kinison was a psychopath. However, there's a condition called psychopathy where people literally don't care. They can't care. The reason they can't care is because probably from birth, so they were born that way, certain pieces in the brain are literally missing that process like empathy and like things like that. So social emotions like guilt and shame. So if someone has no shame and no guilt and no empathy, and then does things that are, objectively where everybody agrees that's not good for anybody, society, anybody, are they guilty? If you literally like, I actually don't care. I'm saying, I know that, the baby was there, but I kicked it anyway because, I just don't care because my brain doesn't, because I can't care, but like, what do you, by the way, I don't feel like that. I'm just saying, I'm just role playing this. So is that person then guilty?
I mean, I guess in this law is kind of one of those hard and fast. So I guess in this world, it's like.
But Western law, not Eastern law, but Western law is based on the idea of responsibility. Sure. So you can make a case from an Eastern legal tradition that it's the punishment is based on potential harm to society. It doesn't matter if you want it or not. If you harm to society, we have to like punish you. Well, let's try this. Let's say this water on your table is my water, and it belongs to me, and I'm thirsty. You're also thirsty, and you want to drink it, and you're a psychopath, so you cannot process the feeling of guilt. And you have a heightened sense of self, so you think you're going to get away with it. And you drink it. You steal it and you drink it. And then we catch you. Are you guilty? It's my water. You knew it was my water. You're not out of touch with reality. You are not confused. You just didn't care because you can't feel guilt.
Yeah, I mean, you are guilty.
You are guilty.
Sure.
Why?
In the eyes of the law.
But why?
Well, I mean, you broke the rule that we've made.
You broke the law. You broke the social contract. Okay, great. But your argument could be, I could have not done something else because my brain values the water. It does not value the social contract. That's actually what a psychopath would say if they were here. They would be like, what social contract? I didn't sign anything.
Right. Yeah.
They would not feel obligated to obey the social contract. They will do whatever they can get away with. And they feel that's the right thing. And they will feel that's the right thing to do. But their brain is telling them that that's the right thing to do. So are they guilty? And by the way, right now, you're absolutely right that the law would hold you accountable no matter what. But that's going to be something that's going to be tried soon, where someone will make that defense. Like, I didn't do it. I'm a psychopath. Look at my brain scan. I do not have these areas that would make me feel guilty. So I'm not guilty.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we're basing it off of responsibility, kind of how you had said, that psychopath, that person doesn't have that sense of responsibility at all.
They do not feel responsible at all, no. So in the field, we call that they know, but they don't care, or they can't care because they don't have the brain hardware. So imagine you're like colorblind, but for like moral things.
Right.
Would you punish someone who's colorblind for not being able to distinguish red and green?
Of course not. No, I'd be in trouble. I'm colorblind.
there you go. So imagine the equivalent for more morality. Why would you punish them? I mean, by the way, I'm not saying we should let psychopaths run free or run loose or encourage that. I'm just telling you that that's the argument they're going to make soon.
Right.
And you just told me that no, legally or more morally or philosophically, it makes no sense to punish them because they couldn't have done it differently because they don't distinguish in that moral dimension, just like you don't distinguish red and green.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's interesting to mix something that is so, I guess, not tangible, like this idea of consciousness and the idea of personal morals and responsibility and that type of thing, and then kind of bring it into a world of hard and fast.
That's the thing. It has very real implications. The reason I'm interested in this stuff is because it has very real implications. Yes, it's not just woo. It's not just fluff. It's not just, oh, we'll talk about it, whatever. No, you know what I mean? It really matters.
Yes. Now, you were speaking a lot about psychopaths.
Yes.
And this is something I know that you had, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did kind of like a seminar, a talk about it.
Oh, yeah, I sometimes talk about it, public outreach, because the reason, by the way, happy to keep talking about consciousness. We don't have to talk about psychopaths at all. But since you raised, yes, the reason why I like to talk about psychopaths is because most people's conception of a psychopath is, ex-murderers, serial killers, violence. And that's just not true. That's just straight up not true. Most psychopaths are definitely not serial killers. There was a rare among psychopaths. Most of them are not even violent, frankly, because they try to avoid stuff they know they will not get away with, if that makes sense. So if you get violent, there's people whose job is to put you in a cage, right? So, and they know that. So they not usually go there. But is it illegal to lie? Usually not, right? So unless you're under oath. So they will lie to you or manipulate you or whatever. So they will go right up to the line because they have no moral responsibility. The second thing I want to say just on that, which is why I give all these talks, is most people think they will be able to recognize a psychopath because they think, it's, serial killer.
Some crazy guy.
Some crazy person is going to look like a freak. He probably has an axe, right? But none of that is true. They actually actively cloak and camouflage. They blend in. So think like chameleon, but like social chameleon. Think like, but predatory. Like, so they will tell you whatever you want to hear because they can tell that quickly what you want to hear. Just tell you that, and you will think, whereas this person been all my life, and then they'll take advantage of you. But that's a separate thing. Anyway, that's why I spread awareness. How about that? Because people like to spread awareness about things, but in the case of psychopathy, it's actually one of those conditions where that actually helps by itself. So let's say I know you're a psychopath, and I just know that I have awareness, right? And I know the science just bought them, and you tell me, hey Pascal, I need $30,000, and I'm gonna be like, that's gonna be a no from me, and
Sure.
and you're like, why not? And I'm like, well, because you're a psychopath. We all know that. So no, hard no. You see what I'm saying? So basically, in this case, just being aware of this prevents you from being victimized. So that's why I raise awareness, which is usually not curative, but in this case, it actually is. It's kind of like a vampire. You have to kind of invite them in for them to do the thing. If once you know they're a psychopath, what are they going to do? Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You kind of got the defense.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting topic for me as well. Oh, totally. I until now basically had the same notion of like, hey, a psychopath is probably some crazy person, all on their own somewhere.
I don't blame you because it's mostly misrepresented in media and popular culture, right? But I have bad news for you. It's much more common than you think, and I would say everybody knows at least one of them. And if you are not aware of who that person is, you're probably being victimized today, right now.
Yeah.
In my experience, in both my research and also in my experience on personal experience, actually.
Sure. Yeah. Now, is there overlapping traits? Like, can you still be a decent person but have some of the things that psychopaths have?
That's a great question. So first of all, let me go to psychopathy. So psychopathy manifests in terms of 3 dimensions of behaviors, right? So one is pro-social versus antisocial behavior. Antisocial not as in they keep to themselves, but antisocial in terms of they're going to steal your stuff and lie to you and things like that. So that's a spectrum, right? The second spectrum is emotional shallowness. We already talked about this. So they don't feel guilt and shame and anything like that, obligation. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum is people who feel guilty about everything, right? And then the third level is how organized they are. So another thing where the popular media got it wrong, popular culture. So if you look at the movies, right, the psychopath has a master plan of blowing up the moon and I don't know, taking over the world. That is not true. They usually are completely disorganized. They are doing all kinds of crimes of opportunity, stealing sandwiches because even if they have a lot of money on them in cash because they just couldn't help it. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is it's not categorical. It's a spectrum. And yes, all of us are on the spectrum. The good news is, Antonio, most people are very low. They're not doing antisocial things. They're doing pro-social things. They do feel like, empathy and guilt and shame, and they are somewhat organized. But there are some people. The estimates are between 1% and 5%. So between 1 in 20 people and 1 in 100 people, they're too high on that spectrum for comfort, right? You can't trust them. That's actually a big problem. You can't trust them, right? They're gonna lie to you, and they will not even feel bad about it. As a matter of fact, I talked to one of them. They were like, so why do you do all these scams, right? They're like, oh, I'm not a scammer. I'm a teacher. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you just defrauded these people out of all this money. Don't you feel bad about it? And they're like, not at all. I'm teaching them not to be so gullible. Because the world is a tough place, and you have to be more street smart. So I'm a teacher. So that's what they say. Can you believe that? So zero responsibility, zero guilt,
Sure.
zero shame. And by the way, I don't think they're just saying that. I do believe they believe this. They feel this. It's fascinating talking to them. Anyway, so you asked, can you be, and the answer is, of course you can. So for instance, let's say someone asks you if some article of clothing makes them look fat. And you don't want to hurt their feelings. And you know from prior history that if you say yes, they're going to be really sad and they're going to feel really bad about themselves. So what are you going to do?
Lie to them.
You're going to say it looks great, right?
Yeah.
That's called a white lie, right? And the argument is but frankly, you're lying to them. If Kant was here, the philosopher, he would say you did the wrong thing, Antonio. It's the wrong thing to do, because lying is always wrong. Yes, that's what he would say.
Sure.
But the reality is we live in a social world, and why would you hurt someone's feelings if they're not actually asking for information? You're asking for approval, and you're being cruel to them, right? Let's say you were starting a stand-up career, right? And you ask your friends how you're doing. Do you really want them to be honest? I mean, maybe you do, but you need some confidence to go up there and bomb, right? But if
Sure.
you think you are, then you're not going to do it, right? So you need your friends to encourage you, right? So basically, you're looking for affirmation and confidence, not for information, and that takes some social awareness that Kant didn't have. So basically, if you lie to make other people feel better about themselves, is that wrong?
No, I don't think it's wrong at all.
There you go. But a psychopath would lie to further their own agenda, which is wrong. So does it make sense? So you can have manipulative traits, which a psychopath has, without being like a psychopath. Yes.
Sure, you can kind of use it for
For
good,
good.
I guess you could say, yeah.
Yes. Just don't go overboard with that.
Right. Another thing I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
especially knowing, your background in neuroscience and the whole thing. We're living in a time where a lot of drugs that were demonized for a while are now kind of coming to the forefront.
Very true. Psychedelics, acid, right?
Yes, MDMA.
MDMA, I was just going to say that, yes. DMT.
DMT, there you go.
Yes, all of those. Yes, you're absolutely right. They were banned in the 70s, 71, I think. And since then, and now they're coming back because of the obvious therapeutic and research potential. Yes, you're right. Correct.
Yeah, so I'm happy that you said obvious, because there's still
there's
still a lot of people who are kind of, that's...
Let's take a step back.
Sure.
So let's see. Why were they banned to begin with? In fairness to Nixon, who banned them, right? The people who did this stuff in the 60s got carried away a little bit, right? They way overdid it.
Sure.
Yeah. They did not respect these drugs. So I think everybody can agree that if you respect these drugs and you take them in a respectful setting, remember setting matters, and do this responsibly, there's basically no harm even, right? I think everybody would agree on that. The problem is that in the 60s, as you know, probably, people just way overdid this, right? They dropped acid left and right. They did crazy things. As a matter of fact, it is not true to say that nobody ever died from acid. One guy jumped out a window because he thought he could fly. And as a matter of fact, if you have schizophrenic tendencies, my advice would be do not do this. It's usually not good. You're not going to have a good time. You can unkindle some latent traits that you don't want to unkindle. Okay. Also, do you know that they once killed an elephant with acid? So you can overdose. once gave an elephant a massive overdose of acid in the 70s, I think, and they published it in the Science magazine. It died immediately. I can send you the paper. It was published in Science. So there can be harm. However, it's also true that the harm pales in comparison to, I don't know, thousands of people die every year in the US from alcohol poisoning, right?
Sure.
And now fentanyl. Didn't 100,000 people die from fentanyl last year? This year?
Yeah, I think it's killed more people than the pandemic or plenty of other things.
Not quite, but more than let me think. More than traffic accidents, murders, and suicides together. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I remember reading something like that.
So anyway, so it's nowhere in that scale. So it was wrong to ban it, but I do understand why they did it, because they in the 60s way overdid it. Yes.
Oh yeah, I'm sure people still overdo it now, but it is great seeing that there is
coming back to now.
Right.
So in the last 5-10 years, and even at NYU now, actually, there are now serious research efforts by serious people to unlock this therapeutic potential of these drugs, MDMA in particular right now, but also others like acid, to see how that can have a therapeutic effect. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean it seems like it's been incredibly successful. I mean, there's stories of.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say how there's been stories of ex-soldiers who've come back and they've taken different whether it's ketamine or MDMA or ayahuasca.
Ketamine too. I forgot about ketamine. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about it all one thing at a time. So first of all, historically, you have to be careful taking these reports at face value for two reasons. First of all, you have to realize all scientists study what they do because they usually have an interest in this. So unfortunately, sometimes they have an agenda. Let's say I study the effect of meditation or the effect of yoga. Those are usually people who are going to show that yoga is really, really effective, yes? So you have to be careful. And in this case in particular, because most of this research has to be the gold standard for this kind of research is a double-blind experimental trial. Yes. So basically, you give some people the drug, and some people you don't give the drug, but give a placebo. But even the researchers don't know who got what. That's the gold standard. And you measure what. Then you measure what happens. The problem with these drugs, as you know, probably, is that they're so potent. How are you going to do that? It's obvious who got the drug. There's no placebo. It's obvious who got the acid. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So a lot of these gold standard protocols are just not applicable. So you have to be. So it took a long time for quality science to come out. Like I said, only the last 5 to 10 years. But as you said, the preliminary research has been extremely encouraging, and from that experience, it is a crime that it was criminalized for 40 years or however long it was outlawed. One example is ketamine, right? So we lose tens of thousands of people every year from suicide, usually from depression. And unfortunately, we do not have a well-functioning first-line antidepressant like the SSRI. And by the way, for those of you hearing this, if it works for you, keep taking it. But for most people, actually, it's actually the majority. It doesn't work. It's called being non-responsive or being a non-responder. So it's actually something we don't really understand. If you give the same drug to some people, they're all depressed. Some people have a great response. Some people have actually a bad response, an adverse reaction. Some people have no response. So if it works for you, great. But unfortunately, it does not work for the majority, like 2/3 of people, right? For reasons that we don't understand. And until recently, there was just like, okay, now what are you going to do? I have good news. These ketamine trials have been amazingly effective. So even in treatment-resistant people, like meaning they've already failed multiple SSRIs, you have remission rates, particularly in young females. There seems to be a gender/age effect, where male makes it less effective and old makes it less effective on average, of over 90%. So, and it's quite dramatic. I've personally seen things that I would have not believed, close to like a miracle, like where the people had been depressed for 20 years and they take a course of, by the way, controlled, we'll talk about this in a moment, ketamine, and they're fine. They're basically cured. They have to do some maintenance, but like they're like, it's amazing. I've seen what I would call miracles. Yes, personally.
Sure. Yeah, and it's very new too, so it's kind of at the
Yeah,
forefront.
but it's been known now since 2005. So since 2005, that's when Sarate introduced the idea and had some early research. But for like, I have an article. I mean, I'm going to send you some materials after the show. You can put in the video description.
Sure.
Something about I wrote something about ketamine in 2013 that this is it. Like I'm now convinced that this is the future of like mental health treatment, and it's amazingly effective. Just to be clear, one thing: this is of course under medical supervision. Those are infusions at low rate, usually at 0.5 milligrams per kilogram, not what an addict would take. Like if you snort it on the street, right, at high dose, then you're at risk of damaging your kidneys. So these are therapeutic doses. 0.5 milligrams per kilogram is not. You're not gonna go into the K-hole, right? What you will do is you will go places, but for some reason that we don't understand fully, that's the how do I say this? The optimum for therapeutic relief from depression. And why is it sex and age related? That has to do with how the ketamine is metabolized in the liver. It seems to be actually that hydronorketamine, H and K, is the active ingredient, and that metabolizes differently in men and women and in old versus young people.
So correct me if I'm wrong. What they're finding is that, specifically with ketamine,
Yes.
That once it takes you, even though it's in a controlled dosage, once it takes you to some place, you're almost kind of, I guess, distorting reality in a sense. And maybe when you come back to, you kind of more or less cured, like you had mentioned.
Great. So here's what's known and here's what's unknown. What's known is that this ketamine works by, okay, so let me take a step back. Neurons communicate by sending chemical signals from where one neuron ends to where the other neurons begins, okay? Yes?
Sure.
And they don't quite touch because you don't have a short circuit. So, but they have little spines, they call dendritic spines. They have little spines where they kind of touch, okay? Like that's why I have a synapse. And in people who are depressed, particularly if they're depressed because they had some traumatic thing happen or they're stressed out, these spines have atrophied, meaning they've died. They're physically gone. What ketamine does, it regrows them physically, fast. So you're basically, it's like fertilizer. You're growing a dendritic tree. It's quite beautiful, actually. What effect the hallucinations have is actually unclear. So pharmaceutical companies are right now, today, as we speak, trying to reverse engineer ketamine without the hallucinations to see if that still has the same effect. Mm. And so they can sell it. And it's unclear at this point if the hallucinations have a causal impact in this, or if it's just epiphenomenal. So meaning it happens, but it doesn't matter. We don't know yet.
Okay. So currently they're kind of doing some research to determine whether or not it's the ketamine itself or it's the hallucinations that help.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Now you also mentioned MDMA and PTSD, yes, and you're absolutely right. That has seen transformational, cure, I would say, where someone has PTSD, right? So something traumatic happened, they have flashbacks, they have all kinds of other bad effects, and then they have this MDMA treatment, and they're basically fine after that. And that seems to be more like, again, I don't want to get too wooey about this, but they somehow came to terms with what happened, you know what I'm saying? Sure. But also probably some brain involvement. Acid, I mean, look, from what I've seen, that seems to be the closest where people have some kind of experience where let's say they are depressed because they had a bad childhood and their father mistreated them or something like that, right? Or but then they take acid and then they realize some kind of epiphany, oh no, it wasn't, that's not what it was. It was my father was himself traumatized or did the best he could, you know what I'm saying? And that's what takes away the depression. But yeah,
Sure.
all three I've seen personally transformational change on this, and the studies suggested too. So the research is also very clear on this now. So yeah, I'm very excited actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredibly exciting, because now
However,
at least it gives a separate route from people who don't feel comfortable taking the antidepressants that we've been.
that's right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a path. However, I do want to raise one thing, because this is a consciousness podcast, or podcast on consciousness. It does raise an important consciousness question, which is, if I can give you this drug that completely alters your experience, right? So if it's acid, you see things. If it's DMT or ketamine, you talk to the machine elves. The question then is, well, so what are you then? Like, if your experience is directly tied to the brain and how the brain activity happens, what does it mean you are then? You know what I'm saying?
You're almost a vessel.
Yes, that's what it suggests, or like something like that. Yeah, and like an avatar or something like that.
Yeah. Very, very interesting stuff. Now, before we close this out, we've been going for a little while now. You had brought up to me that you and some of your students had entered what you had told me, a very big illusion contest. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, so that's funny. Like, what do comics ask at the end? They always ask, "Do you have something to, what do you call it? Not pitch? What is it? You have something to
plug?"
Yes. So that's right. So here's the thing. So actually, I'm not plugging this because the contest ended yesterday. So there's nothing to plug. So thank you, but no. So the thing is, so let me tell you about the contest, or let me tell you about this. So yes, you're right. We are excited to be one of the 10 finalists of this year's Illusions of the Year contest. And what we did, which does actually go with the topic of today's material, is create a new version of, you remember the dress from like 2015, the black and blue dress that was either black and blue or white and gold?
Sure, yeah.
And so that was very exciting. And as you know, I did some research on that. And it shows, again, how the same, kind of like the sound, that the same thing that you look at can look different to different people, which is what my research is all about. So I was very excited about that. But that was kind of like something that happened in the wild. It was like a meme. No one knew what was going on. So we reverse engineered it and now created the effect on purpose by, we called it a Crocs and Socks. So basically we made some Crocs that are pink. So we took some Crocs that are pink, but we put them under green light. So they actually look gray objectively. If you have a photometer and measure the pixel luminance, it's gray. Put them on a black background. So objectively, there's a gray Croc on a black background, but it's really pink under normal light because we shine green light on it. And if you have the person wear white socks, the white socks will then appear green. And then you ask people, what color is that Croc? Some people will say it's gray because that's what it looks like. But some people will say, I know that sock is white. So even though that sock appears green, I can take that into account unconsciously and recover that Croc is pink, looks pink. So I'm going to say it looks pink to me. And that's all happening unconsciously. Mm-hmm. So if someone has lots of experience with white socks, we can show that they think that the Croc is pink. If they're Gen Z and they think that socks can be any color, maybe pastel, maybe they're going to eat the socks. I don't know. You know how Gen Z is. Like to live on the edge, like YOLO, right? So then they will say, I go with what it looks like, which is gray, which I'm very excited about. So we basically created an effect like that on purpose, which then allows us to understand the principles that guide that. And that goes right with that. You tell me the Croc is gray or Croc is pink because that's what it looks like to you. But that's the end product of a lot of unconscious processing that you're not aware of. The people who see it as pink don't realize that they see it as pink because they have so much experience with white socks. They don't.
So they're kind of conditioned to think it a certain way.
Yes. And so are you, but you're not aware of that. So the scary implication is you don't really know why you do certain things or why certain things look like that to you because you can't undo your own learning experience. Like you don't even know what happened to you. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, but you don't know all of it. So, or you don't know what effect it had. So the way the world looks to you is more like how it looks to you, but not to other people, which then address the old philosophical question, is your red the same as my red? And the answer is not necessarily. It's not. So we actually solved that or addressed that, answered that.
How do you even start the process of creating an illusion?
Like that. We found it dress in the wild. Then we thought really, really, really hard about what could be going on. And then we created a stimulus like that, like an image like that. And then we showed that, yes, this stimulus shows the same effect. And you know what? I'm going to also send you that paper so you can put it in the description so people can read it. So I'm going to plug that, as you would say.
There we go. I asked that question because it's like most people, when they think of an illusion, it's like they've already all been made. They're in books. They're in
no. We
whatever.
made one, but in that paper we go through excruciating detail on multiple pages to explain exactly how we did it. So we took the crocs, because crocs can be any color. We put them on a black background so there's no cues. We put them on my attic here, actually, where it's dark, so there's no context. We bought a green light, so we have the right light to neutralize the pink to make it look gray. And then we have the white socks, which then look green. And yeah, it's on the paper. But yes, we call it surf pad. What that means is that substantial uncertainty comes from the lack of cues, combined with ramified or forked priors. The technical term for this is a prior experience. Yes? So that's where you have the SURFP, or assumptions, A, will lead to disagreement. Surf pad. It's a surf pad principle. So yes, you're right. We created this illusion from first principles, and we are very excited. By the way, win or lose, we don't know whether we won this contest or not yet or not. We are very excited about this. This is exciting to us.
Well, the day this episode comes out, we will know whether or not you win or lose and what place you come in. And as we're recording it now on a Monday or the 20th.
We will know soon. All I'm saying is whether that's obvious to the world or not yet is by the way, it's actually an interesting phenomenon. Remember the Wright brothers were the first people to do a controlled flight ever in the history of history, right? On this December 1903, yes?
Yes.
And then they sent a telegram to the news. Do you know what the news said?
I don't.
They said, so what? Because they said, we flew for 54 seconds. They were like, yep. Like, no. Like, come back when you can do it for like an hour. It took them 5 years to convince the world that this is cool.
Right.
So yeah,
which is crazy, because during that time, it's like nobody's ever done it. Why is this not cool?
Read up on it. They were like, the AP were like, yeah, this is BS. We don't care. It took 5 years. As a matter of fact, the first people who seriously reported that was the Gleanings in Beekeeping, an Ohio Beekeepers Journal. I'm not making this up. You can read up on it. I'll send it to you so you can put in the description. So yeah, basically, it's normal that if you do something cool, it's going to take a while for people to realize why it's cool. So right. we are not. I mean, by the way, I hope we won, but I'm just saying that is normal.
Yeah, well, just being involved in it is cool. And what's cool about nowadays is that you don't have to rely on whether or not one media source thinks it's cool or not.
That is very true. Back then, it was very centralized. So basically, the AP killed it. Yes, you're right.
Right.
And they only caught on in the US after they demonstrated in Europe, and the Europeans thought it was cool in 1907, like in Le Mans. Anyway, go ahead. I apologize. I'm rambling, but anyway, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just going to wrap this up. I want to say thank you, Professor, for coming on.
Of course.
I hope this was an incredibly interesting conversation. I hope a lot of people listen to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope this was useful. I don't know. It's hard to gauge.
Well, the premise of the show is to have interesting people talk about interesting stuff. So
I hope it was interesting. Yeah, let me know if it is. I mean, like from your feedback. Yes, like if people tell you this was bogus or it was interesting, you let me know. So thank you.
I will definitely. One other thing: where can people find you?
Online.
If you want them to find you.
Yeah, the Psychopaths, right? So just Google me. I mean, I'm findable. Like we have a website, all of that. Yes.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to it. Make sure you follow me on social media. And that's it, guys. See ya.